The morning sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of Redemption Creek's only church, painting crimson and gold patterns across Clara Whitmore's white wedding dress. She stood before the altar, her hands trembling beneath the lace gloves her mother had worn 30 years prior. The dress, a creation of imported silk and hand-sewn pearls, felt like iron shackles against her skin. "Dearly beloved," her father's voice boomed from the pulpit, each word falling like a hammer blow. Reverend Whitmore stood tall in his black robes, his gray eyes never once meeting his daughter's. "We gather here today to witness the holy union of Clara May Whitmore and Mr. Cornelius Blackwood." Clara's stomach churned as she glanced at the man beside her. Cornelius Blackwood, 43 years old, with cold slate eyes and thin lips perpetually pressed into a line of disapproval. Owned half the cattle ranches from here to Carson City. He'd chosen her not for love, but as payment for a debt her father's way of cleansing the family name after Clara's indiscretion with the blacksmith's son last summer. The congregation sat in rigid rows, women in their Sunday best whispering behind gloved hands, men nodding approvingly at this union that would restore the Whitmore family's standing. Clara recognized every face misses. Henderson, who'd taught her piano. Sheriff Watson, who'd dragged Timothy away that terrible night. Young Sally Morrison, who'd once been her dearest friend before the scandal. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," her father continued, his voice rising with practiced fervor. "A binding before God that washes clean all past transgressions, restoring purity through the sanctity of matrimonial bonds." Clara's breath came in short gasps. The corset beneath her gown squeezed her ribs like a vice. She could feel Cornelius's eyes on her, possessive and calculating, already counting her among his holdings like his prize bulls and silver mines. "If any man has cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," Reverend Whitmore's voice echoed through the wooden rafters, "let him speak now, or forever hold his peace." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara's heart thundered against her chest, a wild bird beating against its cage. Her eyes darted to the church doors, heavy oak barriers between her and freedom. Through the window, she glimpsed the endless Nevada sky, clouds racing across the blue like wild horses. Something inside her snapped. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder. "No!" Before anyone could react, Clara grabbed her skirts and ran. Her father's voice thundered behind her. "Clara, you will not shame this family again." But she was already pushing through the doors, stumbling down the church steps. The congregation erupted in chaos, women shrieking, men shouting, her father's voice rising above all. "Bring her back! Someone stop that girl!" Clara ran through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, her wedding dress catching on fence posts and dragging through mud puddles. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the general store just in time to see her race past, flour sack dropping from her shocked hands. Dogs barked and chased her heels as she fled past the saloon, the bank, the schoolhouse, where she'd once dreamed of teaching before her fall from grace. "There! The Whitmore girl's gone mad!" someone shouted. She veered toward the woods at the town's edge, crashing through the underbrush. Branches tore at her dress, ripping the delicate fabric. Her carefully pinned hair came loose, blonde curls tumbling wild around her shoulders. Behind her, she could hear pursuit boots thundering, horses whinnying, men calling her name. The forest grew denser, darker. Clara's chest burned as she gasped for air, her dancing slippers shredded on rocks and roots. The wedding dress, now mud-stained and torn, tangled in a thorny bush. With desperate fingers, she ripped at the buttons down her back, peeling off the outer layer of silk and leaving it hanging like a ghost in the branches. In her corset and petticoats, she pressed on. A creek appeared through the trees. Clara splashed through without hesitation, the icy water shocking her system. On the far bank, she scrambled up a rocky slope, her hands bleeding from sharp stones. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but she didn't stop. By sunset, she reached the railroad tracks that cut through the wilderness like a scar. A freight train sat idle on a siding, laden with lumber and livestock. Clara didn't think She climbed into an empty cattle car, pressing herself into the darkest corner behind some crates. Hours passed. Night fell complete and cold. Finally, the train lurched to life, wheels screaming against rails as it pulled away from everything Clara had ever known. She huddled in the straw, shivering in her torn undergarments, watching the stars blur past through the slats. "Where you heading?" A gruff voice made her jump. An old vagrant huddled in the opposite corner, his eyes kind beneath a battered hat. "Away," Clara whispered. "Just away." He nodded knowingly and tossed her a moth-eaten blanket. "Train's bound for Elkhorn Ridge, end of the line. Nothing there but mountains and misfits." "Good." Clara pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders. "That's perfect." The train rumbled through the night, carrying her toward a fate unknown. In the darkness of the cattle car, Clara finally allowed herself to cry, not for the life she'd left behind, but for the girl she'd been forced to be. That girl was dead now, left hanging in the forest with her wedding dress. When dawn broke gray and miserable over the mountains, the train wheezed to a stop at a desolate station. Elkhorn Ridge was barely a settlement, a few ramshackle buildings clinging to the mountainside like stubborn weeds. Clara climbed down on shaking legs, the morning frost biting through her thin clothing. "Best of luck to you, miss," the vagrant called after her. "Whatever you're running from, I hope it don't follow." But as Clara stood on that empty platform, watching the train disappear into the mist, she knew there was no outrunning the shame that clung to her like a second skin. Somewhere behind her, Redemption Creek would be waking to the scandal of the runaway bride. Her father would be planning his sermons about fallen women and the wages of sin. Cornelius would be calculating the embarrassment to his business reputation. She was truly alone now, a soiled dove with nowhere to roost. The mountains loomed before her, dark and unforgiving. But even their cold embrace seemed warmer than the life she'd fled. With nowhere else to go, Clara began walking up the muddy trail that led into the wilderness, toward whatever judgment awaited her in those silent peaks. The rain started as she climbed, cold drops mixing with the tears on her cheeks. Within minutes, it became a downpour, soaking through the vagrant's blanket, plastering her hair to her skull. She slipped in the mud, fell to her knees, pushed herself up, and continued climbing. There was nothing else to do but move forward, one step at a time, into the unknown darkness of Elkhorn Ridge. 3 weeks had passed since Jesse Colton carried the half-dead woman into his cabin. Clara had recovered enough to move about, though her ankles still pained her on cold mornings. She'd taken to the work without complaint, feeding the hogs at dawn, splitting kindling for the stove, mending the gaps in the fence where wild creatures tried to steal in. The labor was harder than anything she'd known in Redemption Creek, but it kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. Jesse watched her from the porch as she scattered corn for the chickens, her movements careful but determined. She wore one of his old shirts tucked into a pair of canvas trousers he'd found in the barn, her fine lady's hands now bearing calluses and cuts. He'd stopped asking questions after the first week, sensing the weight of whatever secret she carried. The cabin sat nestled in a valley between two ridges, hidden from the world by stands of pine and aspen. Morning mist clung to the mountainsides like wool, and the first hints of winter showed in the frost that silvered the grass each dawn. Jesse had built the place himself after the war, log by log, a fortress against memories that wouldn't leave him be. "Coffee's ready," he called, his voice rough from another sleepless night. Clara looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll be right there." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner where Jesse slept. Clara had made herself a pallet near the fire, refusing his offers to take the bed. The walls bore no decoration save for an old military jacket hanging on a peg and a faded tintype photograph he never spoke about. They sat across from each other, the morning light filtering through clouded windows. Jesse poured the coffee, strong and bitter as always. Clara wrapped her hands around the tin cup, savoring the warmth. "Snow's coming early this year," Jessie said, gazing out at the mountains. "Maybe another month before the passes close." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken question. When the snow came, leaving would be impossible until spring. She'd either have to go soon or commit to a winter in this isolated place with a man she barely knew. "I can work," she said quietly. "Earn my keep through the winter, if you'll have me." Jessie studied her face, noting the determination in her green eyes. "Works hard here, harder when the snow comes." "I'm learning." That night, the nightmares came again. Clara thrashed on her pallet, crying out in her sleep. In her dreams, she was back in the church, but now the congregation had stones in their hands. Her father stood at the pulpit, reading from Leviticus about unclean women. Cornelius held a branding iron, approaching her with methodical steps. "No, please, I'm not what you think," she moaned. Jessie was beside her in an instant, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Easy now. You're safe. Just a dream." Clara's eyes flew open, wild with terror. For a moment she didn't recognize him, scrambling backward until her back hit the wall. Then reality settled in. The familiar cabin, the dying embers in the fireplace, Jessie's concerned face in the dim light. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Been having my share of nightmares for years," he said, settling back on his heels. "No need for apologies." She drew her knees to her chest, wrapping the blanket tighter. "They want to stone me, in the dream, like the woman in the Bible." Jessie was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, soft as the wind through pines, "Who hurt you so bad you'd rather brave these mountains than face them?" Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She'd held this poison inside for weeks, months, and it was eating her alive. I gave myself to someone. Before marriage, the blacksmith's son, Timothy. He said he loved me, said we'd marry come spring. But when my father found out, Timothy denied everything, said I'd tempted him, led him astray. They ran him out of town. But I was the one left with the shame. Jessie's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Father arranged a marriage to cleanse my sin. A cold man who saw me as property to be bought. Clara's voice broke. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't let him. So I ran, like a coward. Surviving ain't cowardice," Jessie said firmly. "Sometimes running is the bravest thing a person can do." They sat in silence as the fire crackled back to life, Jessie adding fresh logs. Finally, he spoke again. "My wife, Sarah, died while I was away fighting. Cholera took her and the baby she was carrying. I wasn't there to hold her hand or say goodbye or nothing." Clara looked at him, seeing the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "Came back to find 2 graves instead of a family. Townfolk said it was God's will, said I should remarry, start over, but I couldn't stand their pity, their matchmaking, their goddamn certainty about what I needed." He met her eyes. "So I ran too, built this place where nobody could tell me how to grieve or who to be." Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound should have been frightening, but somehow it only emphasized the safety of the cabin's walls. "I'm not her," Clara whispered. "Sarah, I'm not her." "I know that," Jessie said. "You're you, and that's enough." The next days passed in a rhythm of work and careful companionship. Clara learned to milk the ornery goat Jessie kept for cheese, to identify edible mushrooms from deadly ones, to read the signs of weather in the movement of clouds. Jessie taught her to shoot his old Henry rifle, her arms shaking from the recoil but her aim growing steadier. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire while Jessie played his harmonica mournful tunes from the war mixed with lively reels that made Clara's feet itch to dance. She'd darn socks or knit with yarn unraveled from an old sweater, the domestic peace a balm to her battered soul. One night, as rain drummed on the roof, Clara found the courage to ask, "Do you ever think about going back to the world, I mean?" Jessie considered this. whittling a piece of pine into what might become a spoon. Sometimes, when the loneliness gets too heavy, but then I remember why I left, and the mountains don't seem so cold anymore. I dream about my mother sometimes, Clara admitted. She died when I was 12. I wonder what she'd think of me now. My ma used to say that God judges the heart, not the circumstances. Jessie offered. Reckon she'd understand you did what you had to do. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When I was standing at that altar, all I could think was how I'd never be clean again. How that one moment with Timothy had marked me forever, like a brand on cattle. Jessie set down his whittling, his gray eyes fierce. You listen to me, Clara. You ain't cattle. You ain't property. You're a woman who made choices, same as any man would. The world's got no right to brand you for it. Something shifted in Clara's chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized were there. She looked at Jessie, really looked at him, seeing not just her protector, but a man who'd known loss and judgment and had chosen solitude over surrender. Thank you, she whispered. That night, when the rain turned to snow, Clara didn't retreat to her pallet. She sat beside Jessie on the rough bench he'd carved, watching the first flakes of winter dance past the window. When he hesitantly put his arm around her shoulders, she leaned into his warmth instead of pulling away. If you're needing the words, Jessie said quietly. I don't need innocence. Clara already had it once, and it died with Sarah. What I need, if I need anything at all, is someone who knows that broken doesn't mean worthless. Clara turned to face him, seeing her own fragile hope reflected in his eyes. I'm not sure I know how to be anything but broken right now. Then we'll be broken together, he said simply. See what we might build from the pieces. Outside, the snow fell heavier, sealing off the mountain passes and locking them into their private world. But inside the cabin, warmed by fire and tentative trust, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since before her fall from grace, the possibility of a future unmarked by shame. It would be a long winter, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face it. The morning after Jessie's declaration, Clara woke to find him already gone to tend the animals. She moved about the cabin in a daze, his words echoing in her mind. The fire had burned low in the night, and she built it back up, her hands trembling not from cold but from the weight of possibility. When Jessie returned, snow dusting his shoulders, they moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps. The comfortable rhythm they'd established over the past weeks felt charged now, every glance loaded with unspoken questions. I need to check the upper trap line, Jessie said, not quite meeting her eyes. Storm might have damaged it. I'll come with you, Clara offered quickly. You showed me how to reset them last week. He hesitated, then nodded. Bundle up warm. Mountains got teeth when the wind blows. They climbed the narrow trail behind the cabin, Jessie breaking path through the fresh snow. The world had transformed overnight into pristine white. Pine branches bowed under their frozen burden. Clara's breath came in silver clouds as she followed Jessie's footsteps. The rifle he'd insisted she carry heavy across her back. At the ridge, they stopped to rest. The valley spread below them, Jessie's cabin a tiny box amid the vastness. Beyond, mountains marched to the horizon, peak after peak disappearing into low clouds. Beautiful, Clara breathed. Lonely? Jessie countered, but his voice held affection for the harsh landscape. Come spring, you could head north to Montana. Railroad work there, towns that don't ask questions about a woman's past. Clara felt her heart constrict. You planning to send me away already? Planning to give you choices, he said carefully. Winter's got a way of making people feel trapped. Don't want you staying because you got nowhere else to go. She turned to face him fully, seeing the vulnerability he tried to hide. What if I stay because I want to? Before Jessie could respond, a sound cut through the mountain of quiet horses, several of them, laboring up the lower trail. Jessie's face went hard, his hand moving to the Colt at his hip. Get behind those rocks, he ordered. All soldier now. Keep the rifle ready, but don't shoot unless I tell you. Clara scrambled behind an outcropping, her heart hammering. Through the trees, She glimpsed riders, 4 men in long coats, their faces hard and weathered. Bounty hunters, she realized with sick certainty. "Jesse Colton," the lead rider called. "We're looking for a woman, runaway bride from Redemption Creek. Heard tell you might have seen her pass through." Jesse stood relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Don't get many visitors up here. $500 reward." Another rider added, "Her daddy's a preacher. Wants his little girl back. Says she's touched in the head. Needs protecting. From what I hear, she needs protecting from him," Jesse said evenly. The leader's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like you might know something after all." His hand drifted toward his gun. "Why don't you invite us in? Colton, we can discuss this civilized-like." "I don't recall inviting you onto my land at all." Jesse replied, "Best you turn those horses around before the trail gets too icy." "Now see here," the third man started, but Jesse cut him off. "I said turn around." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd given orders under fire. "Won't say it again." The leader studied Jesse for a long moment, taking in the steady hand, the military bearing, the eyes that had seen too much to be frightened by threats. "This ain't over. Colton, that girl's worth good money, and we aim to collect. Then you'd best look elsewhere. Only females on my property got 4 legs and say oink." The riders exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader spat tobacco juice into the snow. "We'll be back, with papers from the territorial marshal if need be." "You do that," Jesse said. "Now get." They watched the riders disappear down the trail, waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Only then did Jesse motion Clara out from hiding. "They'll be back," she said, her voice hollow. "I've brought trouble to your door." "My door's seen worse trouble than them." He studied her pale face. "Question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I won't go back." The words came fierce and sudden. "I'd rather die in these mountains than let them drag me back to that life." Jesse nodded slowly. "Then we'd best prepare. Come on." Back at the cabin, he pulled a trunk from beneath the bed, revealing supplies Clara hadn't known existed. Ammunition, preserved food, medical supplies, even gold coins sewn into a belt. "There's an old trapper's shelter higher up the mountain," he explained, packing efficiently. "Stocked it years ago in case I needed to disappear quick. We can hole up there until they give up or the law comes calling." "We?" Clara stared at him. "Jesse, you don't have to." "You think I'd hand you over to those vultures?" His gray eyes flashed with anger. "You think that little of me?" "I think you've already given me more than I had any right to ask for," she said softly. He paused in his packing, looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Maybe I ain't doing it just for you. Maybe a man gets tired of being alone, of having nothing worth protecting." They worked through the afternoon, preparing for siege or flight. Jesse showed Clara where he kept weapons cached around the property, taught her signs to watch for, paths to run if things went badly. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire one last time, the cabin that had become home feeling temporary again. "I'm sorry," Clara said suddenly. "For all of this, you had peace here, and I—" "Had peace," Jesse interrupted. "Also had emptiness, one safer than the other, but safety ain't everything." She looked at him in the firelight. This scarred, quiet man who'd chosen to stand between her and the world's judgment. Something fierce and protective rose in her chest. Not the desperate infatuation she'd felt for Timothy, but something deeper, forged in shared isolation and understanding. "Jesse," she began, then stopped, not knowing how to voice what she felt. He seemed to understand anyway, moving slowly, giving her time to pull away. He reached out and took her hand. His calloused fingers were gentle, treating her like something precious but not fragile. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together. That's it right with you." Clara twined her fingers with his, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Yes." That night, they packed the last of their supplies by lamplight. Clara found herself standing before the small mirror Jesse used for shaving, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. Gone was the preacher's daughter with soft hands and downcast eyes. In her place stood someone harder, leaner, with steel in her spine and wildness in her heart. Jessie appeared behind her in the reflection. "Second thoughts?" "No," Clara said firmly. "For the first time in my life. No second thoughts at all." He smiled then, a rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "Then we'd best get some sleep. Long climb tomorrow." But neither moved toward their separate beds. They stood frozen in the moment, the lamplight casting golden shadows, the weight of unspoken promises heavy between them. Outside, wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the harsh world waiting beyond the walls. "Clara," Jessie said, his voice rough, "I need you to know, whatever happens up in that shelter, whatever we might, I won't take nothing you don't freely give. You've had enough of men thinking they own you." She turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch the scar that ran along his jaw. "What if I want to give freely? What if I want to choose? For once in my life." His breath hitched, but his eyes remained steady on hers. "Then you choose, Clara Whitmore. You choose when and how and if. I'll wait forever if that's what you need." In response, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, a tentative, questioning kiss that tasted of coffee and possibility. Jessie stood still as stone for a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, gentle but sure, holding her like she might disappear. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Clara felt something settle into place in her chest. This was what choice felt like. Not the fumbling desperation with Timothy, not the cold transaction of an arranged marriage, but two broken people deciding to trust despite all the reasons not to. "We should sleep," Jessie said hoarsely. "Early start." Clara nodded, but didn't step away. Together, his eyes searched hers. "Just sleep? Just sleep. Just not alone. Not tonight." And so they lay down fully clothed on Jessie's narrow bed. Clara tucked against his chest, his arms a protective circle around her. Outside, snow began to fall again, erasing their tracks, buying them time. Tomorrow would bring flight and danger, but tonight they had this, the crackle of the dying fire, the whisper of snow against windows, and the steady beat of two hearts learning to trust in tandem. The trapper's shelter clung to a ledge 2,000 feet above Jessie's cabin, accessible only by a treacherous path that switchbacked through granite cliffs. They'd climbed through the pre-dawn darkness, Jessie leading with the sureness of a man who'd made this journey many times, Clara following in his footsteps, her breath crystallizing in the frigid air. The shelter itself was little more than a cave reinforced with timber, but Jessie had prepared it well. Cached supplies lined the walls. A small stove vented through a natural chimney, and thick furs covered a sleeping platform carved from stone. Through a narrow opening, they could see the valley below and any approach from the main trail. "Home, sweet home," Jessie said, setting down his pack. "Least until those vultures give up." Clara collapsed on a crate, her legs trembling from the climb. The altitude made her lightheaded, but also strangely euphoric. Up here, she felt untouchable, beyond the reach of Redemption Creek's judgment. Jessie built a fire in the small stove, the warmth gradually filling the space. As the sun rose, painting the peaks pink and gold, they shared a simple breakfast of biscuits and dried meat, their shoulders touching in the cramped quarters. "Could be days before they give up," Jessie said, checking his rifle. "Maybe weeks, if your father's money keeps them motivated." "Then we wait," Clara said simply. "I've got nowhere else I'd rather be." He looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. The careful distance he'd maintained even while holding her through the night seemed to crack. "Clara, I meant what I said last night," she interrupted. "About choosing." The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind sang through the rocks, a lonely sound that only emphasized their isolation. They were beyond the world here, suspended between earth and sky with only each other for company. That first day passed in quiet preparation, Jessie showing Clara the shelter's defenses, the hidden exits, The signals they'd use if separated. But as night fell and they huddled near the stove for warmth, the careful boundaries began to blur. "Tell me about before," Clara said softly. "Before the war, before Sarah. Who were you?" Jesse stared into the flames for a long moment. "Son of a farmer in Tennessee, youngest of 4 boys. Thought I'd take over the farm someday, marry the girl from the next property over, raise corn and children." His smile was bitter. "War has a way of changing plans." "How old were you when you enlisted?" 17. Lied about my age. Thought it would be an adventure." He shook his head. "Fool boy. Came back 5 years later feeling like an old man. Everything I'd known was gone. Brothers dead, farm burned, parents buried. Sarah was the only good thing left. And then..." Clara reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." But his grip tightened on hers. "What about you? Before the preacher's daughter? Who was Clara?" She smiled sadly. "I'm not sure there was a before. My father's God was in every breath from the time I could walk. Mother tried to soften it some, but when she died..." Clara shrugged. "I became the perfect daughter. Until I wasn't." "Timothy," Jesse said, not a question. "He was kind to me, noticed me. After years of being invisible except as Reverend Whitmore's daughter, someone saw Clara." She laughed bitterly. "I was so naive. Thought kindness meant love, that desire meant forever." "You were young. I was foolish. But the world doesn't forgive foolish girls." Jesse turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I forgive you, though there's nothing to forgive." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, and Jesse brushed them away with his thumb. The touch sparked something between them, electric and undeniable. Clara leaned into his palm, her eyes fluttering closed. "Clara," Jesse's voice was rough. "We don't have to..." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I want to." He kissed her then, different from the tentative brush of lips the night before. This was deeper, hungrier, full of longing held in check for weeks. Clara responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Jesse's eyes were dark with desire and something deeper. "You're sure?" Instead of answering with words. Clara stood and began unbuttoning her shirt with steady fingers. Jesse watched, transfixed, as she revealed skin pale as moonlight in the firelight. She'd never felt powerful in her body before. With Timothy, it had been rushed, shameful, hidden. But under Jesse's reverent gaze, she felt like something holy. "You're beautiful," he breathed, and Clara heard the truth of it in his voice. She moved to him then, helping him shed his own clothes with careful hands, mapping the scars that told stories of survival. A bullet wound near his shoulder, saber cuts across his ribs, newer marks from years of hard labor. She kissed each one, claiming his history as part of their present. When he laid her down on the furs, his touch was worshipful, patient. He explored her with the same careful attention he gave to reading trail signs, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch beneath him. Clara felt herself coming alive in ways she'd never imagined, her body singing under his ministrations. "Jesse," she moaned, pulling him up to kiss him deeply. "Please." He rose above her, his face serious in the flickering light. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "I want to see you." Clara met his eyes as they joined, gasping at the sensation but never looking away. This was nothing like her furtive encounter with Timothy. This was communion, 2 souls meeting in the most ancient of dances. Jesse moved slowly at first, letting her adjust, watching her face for any sign of discomfort. "More," Clara whispered, wrapping her legs around him. "I won't break." They moved together then, finding a rhythm as old as the mountains surrounding them. Clara felt wild, free, utterly present in her body for the first time. Every nerve sang, every breath was shared, every heartbeat synchronized. When release claimed her, she cried out Jesse's name like a prayer, feeling him follow her over the edge with a groan that seemed pulled from his very soul. Afterward, they lay entwined on the furs, sweat cooling on their skin despite the stove's warmth. Jesse pulled a blanket over them, holding Clara against his chest as their breathing slowly calmed. "You all right?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Clara considered the question. Her body thrummed with satisfaction. But more than that, she felt whole, claimed not as property but as a partner, chosen and choosing in return. "More than all right," she said, turning to kiss him properly. "I feel like myself for the first time." They made love twice more that night, each time a different exploration, playful and laughing once, slow and deep another. Between, they talked in whispers, sharing stories and dreams they'd never voiced aloud. Jesse told her about the nightmares that still woke him, the faces of men he'd killed that wouldn't fade. Clara spoke of the suffocating weight of perfection, the impossibility of being pure enough for her father's God. When dawn broke, they were still awake, watching the sun paint the world new through the shelter's opening. "No regrets?" Jesse asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. She turned in his arms, studying his face, weathered, scarred, but beautiful to her in its honesty. "Only that we waited so long." He smiled then, transforming his features. "We've got time now, all winter if need be." From far below came the faint sound of horses, but up here in their eyrie, it seemed unimportant. The world could search all it wanted. Clara had found what she didn't even know she was looking for. Not rescue, not escape, but recognition. In Jesse's arms, she wasn't the fallen woman or the runaway bride. She was simply Clara, and that was enough. They slept finally as the sun climbed higher, tangled together on the narrow platform, dreamless and deep. Outside, snow began to fall again, sealing them into their private world where shame had no purchase and love grew wild as mountain flowers in spring. Clara found the old newspaper wedged behind a crate of supplies, yellowed and brittle with age. She'd been reorganizing their stores while Jesse checked his trap lines, humming softly in the afternoon quiet. The headline caught her eye. "Local woman dies in cholera outbreak, husband away at war." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. There was Sarah Colton, captured in a faded photograph, young, pretty, with gentle eyes and a shy smile. The article spoke of her charitable works, her patience waiting for her husband's return, the tragedy of her death while carrying their first child. Clara stared at the photograph, seeing what Jesse must see every time he closed his eyes. Sarah looked pure, untouched by the world's cruelties. Everything Clara wasn't. When Jesse returned at dusk, Clara was sitting by the cold stove, the newspaper in her lap. He froze in the doorway, taking in the scene, his face going carefully blank. "Found that, did you?" His voice was neutral, but Clara heard the tension beneath. "She was beautiful," Clara said quietly. "And good. The article talks about how she helped the poor, taught Sunday school." Jesse hung his coat with deliberate movements. I'm nothing like her." "No," Jesse agreed, and Clara's heart clenched. "You're not." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Clara stood abruptly, the newspaper falling to the floor. "I should go. When the snow melts, I should go." "Clara, don't." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the shelter's warmth. "I understand now. I'm not a replacement for her. Maybe, but I'm what's available. Someone to fill the empty space she left." Jesse crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "You think that's what this is? You think I'm using you as some kind of substitute?" "Aren't you?" Clara's voice broke. "When you close your eyes, when you hold me, who do you see?" His grip tightened almost painfully. "I see you. Damn it, Clara, I see you." "But you loved her first, purely, the way a man should love his wife." Tears coursed down her cheeks. "What am I compared to that? A fallen woman you took pity on?" Jesse released her abruptly, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "You want to know the truth about my marriage? The whole truth?" Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure she could bear it. "Sarah was a good woman, kind, gentle, Everything a man was supposed to want. Jessie's voice was raw, and I tried to love her the way she deserved. God knows I tried, but there was always something missing, some spark that never quite caught fire. He paced the small space like a caged animal. When I left for the war, I was relieved. Can you understand that? Relieved to escape the quiet disappointment in her eyes, the dutiful marriage bed, the suffocating respectability of it all. Clara stared at him, this confession reshaping everything she thought she knew. I grieved when she died. Of course I did. She was carrying my child, and the guilt of my relief ate me alive. Jessie's laugh was bitter. The town called me a tragic hero, the devoted husband who lost everything. They didn't know I was a fraud, play-acting at love while my wife died alone. He turned to face Clara fully, his eyes blazing. But you, Christ, Clara, you set me on fire from the moment I carried you out of that storm? Not because you're available, not because you're filling some empty space, because you're wild and brave and real in a way Sarah never was, because you've been broken and put yourself back together crooked and beautiful. Clara's breath hitched. Jessie, I loved Sarah like a brother loves a sister, like a friend loves a friend, but I love you like a man loves a woman, desperate and hungry and whole. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. When I close my eyes, I see you. When I dream, it's your name on my lips. You're not a replacement. Clara, you're a revelation. She searched his face, finding only fierce sincerity. But I'm not pure, not good like she was. Thank God for that, Jessie said roughly. I don't want pure. I want real. I want the woman who ran from her own wedding, who learned to shoot a rifle and birth piglets, who comes alive in my arms like wildfire. Clara kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope into the connection. When they broke apart, she whispered, I love you too, desperate and hungry and whole. They made love with an intensity born of near loss, clinging to each other as if to prove their solid reality. Afterward, Jessie retrieved the old newspaper and fed it to the stove, watching Sarah's photograph curl and blacken in the flames. No more ghosts, he said firmly. Just us. Clara nodded, but uncertainty still gnawed at her. In the morning, she woke before Jessie and slipped out of their warm nest. The dawn was crystal clear, the storm having passed in the night, far below. She could see the trail to Jessie's cabin, and beyond that, the path that led back to the world. She wasn't running, not exactly, but she needed space to think, to breathe, to decide if she could truly build a life on the ashes of another woman's memory. The newspaper was gone, but Sarah's gentle eyes seemed to follow her as she picked her way down the treacherous path. The main cabin sat silent and cold, abandoned these past days. Clara built a fire and sat at the rough table where she'd shared so many meals with Jessie. Everything here spoke of him. His tools hung precisely on the walls, his clothes folded with military neatness. But underneath, she could see traces of before. A woman's shawl forgotten on a high shelf, a delicate teacup, chipped but carefully mended. The detritus of a life, interrupted. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the horses until they were nearly at the door. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the voices. The bounty hunters. Returned as promised. Smoke from the chimney, one said. Someone's home. Clara grabbed Jessie's rifle from its place by the door, checking the ammunition with shaking hands. 3 men dismounted in the yard, approaching with the casual confidence of those who'd never been denied their prize. Hello in there, the leader called. We know you're alone. Miss Whitmore. Colton's tracks lead up the mountain. Come out peaceful-like, and no one needs to get hurt. Clara's mind raced. Jessie wouldn't know she'd left, wouldn't realize the danger until too late. These men would take her back to Redemption Creek, back to her father and Cornelius, and a life that would kill her as surely as any bullet. I'm not going back, she called through the door. I'll die first. Now, miss, that's no way to talk. Your daddy's worried sick, just wants his little girl home safe. His little girl is dead, Clara said fiercely. Buried in a wedding dress in the woods. I'm someone else now. She heard them conferring in low voices. Then footsteps circling the cabin, testing her resolve, looking for weakness. Clara gripped the rifle tighter, remembering Jesse's lessons. Breathe steady. Squeeze. Don't pull. Aim for center mass. Last chance. Miss. Come out. Or we come in. Clara said nothing, sighting down the barrel at the door. She thought of Jesse, probably just now waking to find her gone. Would he understand why she'd left? Would he come for her? The door exploded inward with a crash. Clara fired, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. A man cried out, falling back. She worked the lever, firing again as another figure appeared. The shots were deafening in the small space, smoke filling the air. Then silence. Clara's ears rang. Through the smoke, she saw two figures on the ground, one moaning, one still. The third had taken cover outside. Her hands shook as she reloaded, knowing she had seconds before. You shot them. You actually shot them. The third man's voice was high with disbelief. Weatherby's dead. You killed him. Clara felt no remorse, only a cold clarity. I said I wasn't going back. You're going to hang for this. Murder of a lawman. He wasn't law. Just another man who thought he could take what he wanted. A shadow fell across the doorway. The third bounty hunter stood there, gun drawn, face twisted with rage. Drop the rifle. Clara met his eyes steadily. No. They faced each other across the small space, weapons raised, death hanging between them like morning mist. Clara thought of all the times she'd submitted, surrendered, allowed others to choose her fate. No more. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the valley, but it wasn't Clara who fired. The bounty hunter crumpled forward, his weapon clattering across the floor. Behind him stood Jesse, his Colt still smoking, snow in his hair and murder in his eyes. Clara! He stepped over the fallen man, reaching for her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak, the rifle still clutched in her white-knuckled hands. Jesse gently pried it away, pulling her against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, matching her own. I woke up and you were gone, he said roughly. Thought you'd... Then I heard the shots. I'm sorry. I needed to think, and they came, and I... She looked at the bodies, the reality crashing over her. Oh God, Jesse, what have we done? What we had to... His voice was steel. Come on, others might be coming. They worked quickly, Jesse checking the bodies with grim efficiency. 2 dead, 1 badly wounded but breathing. He bound the wounded man's injuries with practiced hands, propping him against the wall. You'll live if you're smart, Jesse told him. When you can ride, you get out of here and you forget you ever heard the name Clara Whitmore. Understood. The man nodded weakly, fear replacing his earlier bravado. Clara gathered what supplies she could carry while Jesse saddled 2 of the bounty hunter's horses. Within minutes, they were riding hard up the mountain trail, leaving the cabin and its grim scene behind. Where are we going? Clara asked as they climbed higher into wilderness. Away, far as we can get before the law comes looking. Jesse's face was set, determined. North to Canada, maybe, or west to California, somewhere we can disappear. Jesse, stop. Clara reined in her horse. Just stop. He turned in the saddle, confusion creasing his brow. Clara, we don't have time. I won't run anymore. The words came out firm, surprising her with their certainty. I've been running since I fled that church, running from shame, from judgment, from myself. I'm done. They'll hang us both for what happened down there. Maybe, or maybe they'll listen to the truth. Clara straightened her shoulders. I was defending myself against men who would have dragged me back to a life of servitude. You were protecting me. That's not murder. That's justice. Jessie stared at her like she'd lost her mind. The law doesn't care about justice for women like you. You know that. Then we make them care. Fire blazed in Clara's chest, righteous and cleansing. I'm tired of hiding like I've done something wrong. Loving you isn't wrong. Choosing my own life isn't wrong. If they want to hang me for that, let them try. Clara, no, listen. She urged her horse closer, reaching out to grasp his hand. "You asked me once what I wanted. I want to stop being afraid. I want to build a life with you without looking over my shoulder. And if that means facing down my father, the law, the whole damned world, then that's what we do." Jessie searched her face, seeing the steel that had always been there, now fully forged. "You're sure? Once we go back, there's no running. I've never been more sure of anything." They returned to the cabin to find the wounded bounty hunter trying to crawl to his horse. He froze when he saw them, expecting a bullet. Instead, Jessie helped him into the saddle. "You tell them we'll be in Elkhorn Ridge," Jessie said. "Tell them we'll come peaceful, but we'll be armed. And if they want to talk to Miss Whitmore, they'll do it respectful-like." The man nodded rapidly and spurred his horse down the trail, eager to be away from this place of death. Over the next 2 days, Clara and Jessie prepared their defense. They moved the bodies to the barn, covering them respectfully. Clara wrote out her account of events in careful script, detailing not just the shooting but everything that led to it, her forced engagement, her father's tyranny, the pursuit that drove her to desperation. On the 3rd day, they came. Not just lawmen, but half the town of Redemption Creek, drawn by scandal and bloodshed. Clara watched from the window as the crowd assembled in the yard, Sheriff Watson, Judge McKinnon, and there, stepping down from a borrowed wagon, her father. Reverend Whitmore had aged in the months since she'd seen him. His hair, once iron gray, had gone white, but his eyes still burned with the same cold fire that had terrified her as a child. "Jessie Colton," Sheriff Watson called. "You and Clara Whitmore come out slow. We need to sort this mess out proper." Jessie looked at Clara. "Ready?" She smoothed her hair, lifted her chin. "Ready." They emerged together, Jessie's hand steady at her back. The crowd rustled, whispers flying at the sight of the runaway bride in men's clothing, standing tall beside her lover. "Clara," her father's voice cut through the murmur. "Come here, child. This madness has gone on long enough." "I'm not a child. Father," Clara's voice carried clear and strong. "Haven't been for a long time. You're a murderer now, it seems." Cornelius Blackwood stepped from behind the Reverend, his thin face twisted with satisfaction. "My bride-to-be, killing men like a common outlaw." "I was never your bride," Clara said steadily. "I was payment for a debt, property to be transferred. Well, I reject that transaction." Judge McKinnon, a fair man despite his stern appearance, raised a hand for silence. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Colton, you stand accused of the murders of Harvey Weatherby and Thomas Crane, bounty hunters licensed by the territory. How do you answer?" "Self-defense," Jessie said simply. "They came onto my property, threatened Miss Whitmore, broke down my door. We did what anyone would do." "Anyone?" Cornelius sneered. "Decent folks don't shoot down law-abiding men. Decent folks don't hunt women like animals either." Clara shot back. She turned to address the crowd, recognizing faces from her former life. "Yes, I ran from my wedding. Yes, I've been living here with Jessie Colton unwed. And yes, I shot those men when they tried to drag me back to a life I didn't choose." Gasps and mutters rippled through the assembly. Someone shouted Jezebel, but Clara stood firm. "But I ask you," she continued, her voice rising, "what choice did I have? Marry a man who saw me as property? Live forever as a fallen woman in my father's house? Die by my own hand from despair?" "Dramatic nonsense," her father interjected. "You had the choice of redemption through marriage. You chose sin instead." "I chose love," Clara said firmly, reaching for Jessie's hand. "I chose a man who sees me as a person, not a possession. If that's sin, then I'll proudly be a sinner." An unexpected voice rose from the crowd. "Let her speak." It was Mrs. Henderson, the piano teacher. "I've held my tongue too long. We all know what kind of marriage Cornelius offered, cold as a tomb and twice as final." "Silence, woman," Reverend Whitmore thundered. But other voices joined in. "Clara helped my boy when he was sick," a farmer's wife called out. "Didn't matter to her that we couldn't pay the doctor. She taught my daughter her letters," another added. "Only one who would," after her father died. Judge McKinnon had to shout for order. When quiet finally fell, he turned to the wounded bounty hunter who'd been brought to testify. "Tell us what happened, Mr. Doyle." The man shifted nervously. We came to collect the bounty. Broke down the door when she wouldn't come out. She warned us fair, said she'd shoot. We didn't believe a woman would do it. And Mr. Colton wasn't there when it started, only showed up at the end, when Crane was fixing to shoot the lady. Doyle swallowed hard. If he hadn't fired, she'd be dead now. That's the truth of it. The judge considered this, then turned to Sheriff Watson. They conferred in low tones while the crowd waited. Tension thick as summer honey. Finally, Judge McKinnon spoke. The law is clear on self-defense. A person has the right to protect their home and person from unlawful attack. While bounty hunting is legal, breaking down doors and threatening citizens is not. This is outrageous. Cornelius stepped forward. You're going to let them get away with murder? I'm going to apply the law fairly, Mr. Blackwood. The judge's voice was stern. As for the matter of Miss Whitmore's living situation, that's not a criminal matter. If her father wishes to pursue it in civil court, that's his right. I'll do more than that, Reverend Whitmore said coldly. I'll see her cast out, shunned by all decent folk. She's no daughter of mine. Clara felt the words like a physical blow, but Jessie's hand tightened around hers, anchoring her, around them. The crowd was shifting, taking sides. Some nodded agreement with the Reverend, but others, more than Clara had expected, looked troubled. Then that's your choice, Reverend, Judge McKinnon said, but the criminal matter is settled. Mr. Colton, Miss Whitmore, you're free to go. As the crowd began to disperse, arguing among themselves, an elderly woman approached. Clara recognized her, Widow Hartley, who'd never missed a Sunday service in 40 years. Child, she said softly, pressing something into Clara's hand. This was my mother's. She ran away from an arranged marriage, too, back in the old country. Found my father and lived 50 happy years. Don't let them tell you love is sin. Clara looked down at the small gold cross in her palm, tears blurring her vision. Thank you. One by one, others approached. Not many, but enough. Women who'd suffered in silence. Men who'd seen too much judgment in the world. They offered quiet words, small gifts, defiance of the Reverend's edict of shame. As the sun set over Elkhorn Ridge, Clara and Jessie stood in their cabin doorway, watching the last of the crowd disappear down the mountain trail. Her father had left without another word. Cornelius beside him, both men rigid with injured pride. It's not over, Jessie said quietly. Your father will make trouble. The town will talk. Let them, Clara said, fierce and free. I'm done living for their approval. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd stood between her and the world's judgment. I love you, Jessie Colton, shamefully, sinfully, completely. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. And I love you, Clara soon-to-be Colton, if you'll have me. Is that a proposal? It is, though I can't offer you much beyond this cabin and a life of hard work. Clara pulled him down for a kiss, pouring all her answer into the touch. When they broke apart, she whispered, It's everything I never knew I wanted. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they went inside their home, no longer a refuge or hideout, but a beginning. Tomorrow would bring challenges, judgment, the long work of building a life on their own terms. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The ghost of Sarah Colton was finally laid to rest, not by forgetting, but by choosing the present over the past. And Clara Whitmore, the runaway bride, became simply Clara Woman, lover, fighter, free. Spring came slowly to the mountains, melting snow revealing the earth beneath like a secret told in whispers. Clara stood in their newly planted garden, dirt under her fingernails, satisfaction warming her chest as green shoots pushed through the soil. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with the town, 6 months of building a life on their own terms. Looking good, Jessie said, approaching with lumber balanced on his shoulder. They'd been expanding the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Beans are coming up strong. Everything's coming up strong, Clara replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Her hands, once soft from a life of indoor work, were now calloused and capable. She wore men's trousers and one of Jesse's old shirts, her hair tied back with a leather cord. If her father could see her now, he'd declare her beyond redemption. The thought made her smile. They'd married quietly in February, traveling to a small town 3 days north where no one knew their names. The justice of the peace, a kind man with twinkling eyes, had performed the ceremony without questions. Clara had worn her only good dress, blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Jesse had shaved for the occasion, looking almost boyish despite his scars. Clara Colton, she murmured to herself sometimes, still marveling at the simple freedom of choosing her own name. A rider appeared on the trail below, and both tensed until they recognized the figure. Doc Morrison from Elkhorn Ridge visited monthly, bringing medical supplies and news from the outside world. He'd become an unexpected ally, one of the few who'd stood by them publicly. "Morning, folks," he called, dismounting with a grunt. At 60, his bones protested the mountain trails, but he made the journey anyway. "Brought your supplies, plus something extra." He handed Clara a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was fabric soft yellow cotton sprigged with tiny flowers, enough for a dress. "From Mrs. Henderson," Doc explained. "She said to tell you she started a sewing circle. 8 women so far, meeting weekly. Your name comes up often." Clara fingered the fabric, throat tight with emotion. "Tell her thank you. For everything." "There's more news," Doc continued, accepting the cup of coffee Jesse offered. "Your father's left Redemption Creek." Clara's hand stilled. "Left? Took a position back east. Said the town had grown too permissive, too accepting of sin." Doc's eyes crinkled. "Funny thing is, after he left, folks started talking more freely. Turns out you weren't the only one who felt crushed by his particular brand of righteousness." "And Cornelius?" Jesse asked. "Found himself a new bride, widow from Sacramento with 3 children and a spine of steel. Word is she runs him ragged." Doc chuckled. "Serves him right." They sat on the porch Jesse had built, watching the sun climb higher. The valley spread before them, green and gold in the morning light. Their small herd of cattle grazed in the lower pasture, and chickens pecked around the yard. It wasn't much by town standards, but it was theirs, built by their own hands. "I should tell you," Doc said carefully. "There's been talk in town about inviting you back, not to live, necessarily, but to visit, trade, be part of the community again." Clara felt Jesse's hand find hers. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "No rush. The invitation stands when you are." Doc finished his coffee and stood. "I best be heading back. These old bones don't ride as easy as they used to." After he left, Clara and Jesse worked in companionable silence. Him on the cabin expansion, her in the garden, but her mind churned with the news. Her father gone, the town softening, the possibility of connection beyond their isolated valley. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she voiced her thoughts. "Do you ever miss it? Being part of the world?" Jesse considered, whittling a new spoon. "Sometimes, miss having neighbors, folks to talk to besides each other, but then I remember what that world cost us, and the missing fades. What if we could have both? Our life here, but also connections, friends, maybe even help other folks who need what we found." He set down his knife, studying her face. "What are you thinking?" Clara had been turning the idea over for weeks, but Doc's visit had crystallized it. What if we offered shelter, not permanent, just a way station for women who need to escape, like I did? That's dangerous thinking. Harboring runaways. The law might not look kindly on it. The law didn't look kindly on me defending myself either, but justice prevailed. Clara leaned forward, passion lighting her features. "Jesse, I was lucky. I found you. Found safety. But how many others are out there, trapped in marriages or situations that are killing them slowly? Jesse was quiet for a long moment. Then, Sarah would have liked that idea, helping folks. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife without pain shadowing the words. Clara reached for his hand, understanding the gift in that simple statement. Then we'll do it careful-like, he said. Quiet. Word of mouth only. Clara kissed him, tasting promise and partnership. Thank you. Spring turned to summer, and with it came their first visitor. A young woman named Mary, barely 17, arrived on foot with a black eye and a split lip. She'd heard through whispers that the Colton place offered sanctuary. Clara settled her in the newly finished spare room, tending her wounds while Jesse reinforced the locks and kept watch. Mary stayed 3 weeks, healing in body and spirit. Clara taught her to shoot, to ride, to read maps. Jesse showed her basic carpentry and how to hunt. When she left, heading west to an aunt in California, she carried supplies, money, and something more valuable, the knowledge that she could survive on her own terms. Word spread as these things do, carried on wind and whispered in washhouses. By autumn, they'd sheltered 4 women, each with their own story of escape. Clara kept a journal, documenting not names or details that could endanger anyone, but lessons learned, resources needed, connections made. One crisp October evening, Clara stood on the hill above their cabin, surveying their small kingdom. The cabin had grown to include 3 rooms and a root cellar. A second small dwelling housed visitors. The garden had expanded, preserving enough food for winter and extra for those who might need it. Jesse climbed up beside her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Regrets? None, Clara said firmly. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. She turned in his arms, seeing the man he'd become, still scarred, still careful, but no longer hollowed by grief. Their love had grown from desperate need to steady partnership, deep as mountain roots. I've been thinking, she said carefully, about what comes next. Oh, the thing is, she took a breath, gathering courage. The thing is, I'm pregnant. Jesse went absolutely still. Then, with trembling hands, he framed her face. You're sure? Doc confirmed it last visit. Due in spring. A sound escaped him. Half laugh, half sob. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Clara, my Clara. They stood wrapped together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Below them, smoke rose from their chimney, warm light spilling from windows. It wasn't the life either had planned in their youth, but it was the life they'd chosen, built from courage and defiance and love. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, Today I told Jesse about the baby. I see now that we've been building more than a home these months. We've been building a legacy. Not one of shame or sin, as my father would name it, but of freedom. Our child will grow up knowing they were wanted, chosen, loved without condition. They'll learn that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to save your life. That love doesn't always look like what the world expects, that a woman can be strong and soft, a man can be fierce and gentle, and both can build something beautiful from the ashes of what they were told to be. Tomorrow I'll write to Mrs. Henderson, accepting her invitation to visit town. It's time to stop hiding, to take our place in the world we're helping to change. One rescued soul at a time. Our mountain sanctuary will remain, a lighthouse for those navigating storms. But we'll also walk among people, proof that there's life after scandal, love after loss, hope after running. I am Clara Colton, wife, gardener, guardian, and soon-to-be mother. I am not fallen. I am risen. She set down her pen and joined Jesse by the fire, their hands linked over the promise of new life. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing their world in fresh white. But inside was warmth and light and the quiet celebration of 2 people who'd risked everything for love and won. The empty spaces in both their hearts had filled not with replacements for what they'd lost, but with something entirely new, a love born of choice, tempered by trial, and strong enough to shelter others seeking their own redemption. The spring rains came early that year, turning the mountain trails to mud and swelling the creeks with snowmelt. Clara stood at the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Jesse repair the fence in the lower pasture. Their child moved within her, strong kicks that made her smile despite the discomfort. "Easy there, little one," she murmured. "Your papa's working hard enough for both of us." A year had passed since she'd accepted Mrs. Henderson's invitation to visit town. That first trip had been terrifying, walking the streets of Elkhorn Ridge as Clara Colton, head high, past the whispers and stares. But Mrs. Henderson's sewing circle had welcomed her warmly, and gradually, visit by visit, the town had grown accustomed to the scandalous woman who'd chosen love over propriety. Now she made the trip monthly, trading preserves and vegetables for supplies, sharing news with the growing network of women who quietly supported each other. The sewing circle had become more than stitching and gossip. It was a lifeline for those trapped in unhappy situations, a source of strength and practical help. "Mrs. Colton," a voice called from the trail. Clara turned to see young Sally Morrison, now Sally Baker, riding up with her husband Tom. They'd been married just 6 months, a love match that had delighted the town's romantics. "Sally, what brings you up the mountain in this weather?" Sally's face was flushed with excitement as she dismounted. "I had to tell you in person. I'm expecting." Clara embraced her former friend, tears pricking her eyes. Sally had been one of the first to renew their friendship after Clara's return to town society. "Oh, Sally, that's wonderful. Our babies will grow up together," Sally said, eyeing Clara's belly. "Isn't it strange how things turn out? When we were girls, I thought you'd marry the minister's son from Carson City, have a proper house in town. And you thought you'd be a spinster school teacher?" Clara laughed. "Life rarely follows the path we expect." Tom had joined Jesse in the pasture, the two men talking easily. It still amazed Clara how their circle had widened, how the isolation that once protected them had given way to carefully chosen connections. That evening, after the Bakers had left, Clara felt the first real pain. She had been having twinges all day, but dismissed them as the baby settling. This was different, a deep, gripping sensation that stole her breath. "Jesse," she gasped, gripping the table edge. He was beside her instantly, face tight with concern. "Is it time?" "I think so. It's too early. There's still 3 weeks." "Babies come when they're ready." He helped her to their bed, hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'll ride for Doc Morrison." "No." Clara grabbed his hand. "Don't leave me. Please." Another pain rolled through her, stronger than the last. Jesse held her through it, murmuring reassurances. "When it passed," he said firmly, "I have to get help. You can't do this alone. Then bring Mrs. Baker back. Sally's delivered enough babies on her family's farm." Clara managed a weak smile. "Seems fitting, having a friend here for this." Jesse kissed her forehead and was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. Clara focused on breathing, on the candle flame dancing on the bedside table, on anything but the growing intensity of the pains. Time became fluid. Sally arrived with her mother, both women calm and competent as they prepared the room. Jesse paced outside, his footsteps a steady rhythm that somehow comforted Clara even through the closed door. "You're doing fine," Sally soothed, wiping Clara's face with a cool cloth. "Remember when we were 12 and you fell from the Hendersons' apple tree? Broke your arm but didn't cry once. You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong," Clara panted between contractions. "Strength isn't about feeling it," Sally's mother said wisely. "It's about continuing when you don't." The hours blurred together, pain and rest, pushing and breathing. Sally's encouragement and her mother's experienced guidance. Dawn was breaking when Clara heard the sound that made everything worthwhile. Her baby's first cry. Fierce and healthy. "It's a girl," Sally announced, tears streaming down her face. Clara reached for her daughter with trembling arms, awestruck by the tiny, perfect face scrunched in protest at the bright world. The baby had Jessie's dark hair, but Clara's stubborn chin, already visible in miniature. "Jesse," Clara called weakly. "Come meet your daughter." He entered cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the scene. When he saw them, Clara exhausted but radiant, their daughter nestled against her breast, his composure cracked entirely. He sank to his knees beside the bed, one finger gently touching the baby's fist. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Both of you. Perfect. What will you name her?" Sally asked softly. Clara looked at Jesse, seeing her answer reflected in his eyes. Hope. Hope, Sarah Colton. It was acknowledgement and moving forward both, honoring the past while embracing the future. Jesse pressed his forehead against Clara's shoulder, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. As the sun climbed higher, filling the room with golden light, Clara wrote a final entry in her journal with her free hand while Hope nursed. "She's here, our daughter, born as dawn broke over the mountains that gave us sanctuary. I think of the woman I was 2 years ago, frightened, shamed, certain my life was over. I could never have imagined this moment, this fullness of joy. The path here was hard. There were times I thought the judgment would break me, that the weight of others' expectations would crush whatever small flame of self I had left. But I learned something vital. Sometimes you have to burn down what you were told to be in order to become who you truly are." Jesse sleeps in the chair beside us now, one hand on Hope's back, unable to let go even in exhaustion. He whispers to her about the mountains, the garden, the life we've built. He promises her she'll never have to run from who she is, never have to choose between love and acceptance. Our daughter will grow up knowing she was conceived in love, born into freedom, raised with the absolute certainty of her own worth. Mrs. Henderson sent word that the sewing circle is making a quilt for Hope. Each woman is contributing a square, stitching their stories into something beautiful and useful. It seems fitting, all these women who society might call fallen or improper, creating something precious for the next generation. I think I'll teach Hope to shoot and to sew, to read Latin and to birth calves, to dance at socials and to stand alone when necessary. Jesse will teach her to track deer and to play harmonica, to build with her hands and to defend what matters. Together, we'll teach her that love comes in many forms, not all of them approved by the world, but all of them valid. The snow is melting from the high peaks, and our valley blooms with wildflowers. In a few weeks, we'll take Hope to town for the first time. Some will welcome her. Others will whisper about the circumstances of her parents' union. But she'll be surrounded by love, not just ours, but that of the chosen family we've built from other misfits and wanderers. I am no longer Clara Whitmore, the runaway bride. I am Clara Colton, wife, mother, keeper of sanctuary, liver of truth. My daughter will never know the weight of shame I carried. She'll know only that her mother chose love over safety, authenticity over approval, and never once regretted it. The mountains stand eternal around us, witnesses to our small human dramas. In their shadow, we've built something that will outlast judgment, a home where broken people can heal, where love doesn't require permission, where choosing yourself isn't selfish but necessary. Hope stirs in my arms, making soft sounds of contentment. Jesse mumbles in his sleep about expanding the garden. The fire crackles low in the hearth, and I sit here, filled with a peace I never thought possible, grateful for the storm that drove me to this mountain, this man, this life I never knew I wanted but can't imagine living without. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Sometimes the very thing they call your downfall becomes your salvation. Sometimes running away is really running toward. I was a bride who fled in tears. I found a rancher who said, "I don't need a virgin, I need you." And in choosing each other, we chose ourselves. Our story isn't over, it's just beginning. But this chapter, the one that started with shame and ended with joy, is complete. Hope Sarah Colton is here, and with her, all things seem possible. Clara set down her pen and gazed out the window at the mountains bathed in morning light. The cabin that had once been her refuge was now simply home, filled with love and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. In her arms, Hope slept peacefully, unaware that she was already changing the world just by being born into it freely. The wildflower swayed in the valley below, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat, but a celebration of another survivor in this harsh and beautiful land. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Jesse's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like our mountain lovers connected across their trials. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of courage, passion, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of Clara's choice? Jesse's redemption? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.